strange. We're several weeks into this war with Iran, and I'm just going to open it up with a big open question right now, and I'm going to let you just flow, and depending on what you say, will determine what I do next or what I say next. But where do you see things right now? Trump is saying, it's time for the war is basically victorious. We've destroyed Iran. They have no more military. They're decapitated. They're begging him to make a deal, but no, he's not ready for that. We're hearing so many weird messaging, but the reality seems to be very different. So what's your assessment of where we're at right now?
Well, first of all, we really see Trump for what he is, thanks to this war, if we hadn't seen it already. And that is that you can't trust a thing coming out of this guy's mouth. And there are real concerns about how actually his brain's working, to be honest. Either he's the greatest narcissistic man baby ever, who is such a con man, he just doesn't care how he's perceived in the way he contradicts himself from 1 second to the next. It's not even 1 minute to the next, it's 1 second to the next. He's contradicting himself. Or at the age of 80, it's not necessary in Joe Biden's category yet, but there are real cognitive issues there, and that's certainly a problem. But this is if anyone had ever had time for Trump, as I did, and I'm an Australian, so in one sense it was never really an issue, except as a Commonwealth country, and as Australia, we have to be very aware of who is the president of the United States, because our country is so subservient to US and British power that the occupant of the White House absolutely affects us. So we paid close attention, and we did have time for him in one sense. Not that we always knew this guy was some kind of shyster and a con man, but we sort of figured, well, he's as a shyster and a con man, he's just a bit more unmasked than the rest of them. They sort of all are, from what we could tell. The US politics is all owned by Wall Street. But he was interesting because he reflected a current in America that had very much become anti-war after being involved in so many of them for so long. And that was a good thing for the world, right? The American population was turning against war. And that's what Trump represented. He was I remember, Matt, he was the first serious political contender putting Ron Paul aside, right? Ron Paul, deserves a special category, I think. But putting Ron Paul aside, Donald Trump was the first serious political contender to call out the Iraq War in 2016, that it was being based on deliberate lies. And he did that in the South Carolina primary in George W. Bush's home territory, essentially, right, where Bush was supposed to win. And Trump said they lied, they deliberately lied. This war is based on lies, right? And that's when I first started taking him seriously. So that was 10 years ago. Probably 10 years ago to the day. For around now, 10 years ago he did that, right? 10 years later, he has become the lying warmonger he denounced 10 years ago. And the people who hated him 10 years ago, the neoconservatives in America who really hated him, that totally despised him, right? People, the Bill Kristols of this world, Lindsey Graham. I mean, I saw one of the funniest segments I've ever seen on television when Lindsey Graham appeared on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart in 2016, playing billiards, pool, and ranting and raving about how terrible Donald Trump was. I mean, this guy just totally despised him. Marco Rubio hated him. He humiliated Marco Rubio in those primaries in that year. Marco Rubio absolutely despised him. Now he is their man, right? And he has given them their war. And as you would know, you'd remember back in 2007, 8, we, and I mean you and I and many other people that were involved in the International Association led by Lyndon LaRouche, we fought very hard to stop Dick Cheney starting a war in Iran, right? Dick Cheney had been the driver behind the Iraq War, and then he was going to double down and go to Iran. And we fought very, very, very hard to stop that, and we were able to stop it. But now he's given them a war that they have always wanted, and it's really mind-blowing how. I mean, one aspect of it that's shocking is the way, as bad as Bush and Cheney were, and there's no exaggerating how bad they were, the effort they went to try to put the appearance of international law on their war was, impressive in a way compared to what we're doing now. There's just no care anymore from this White House, from the American government. There's no care at all of how it seems. International law is dead. It is, they absolutely might makes right. That is what they say. That is their new message to the world. We can do whatever we want. And you think, well, is the only way this is going to be stopped is if somehow Iran has the technology to return to the Americans what they have done to Iran, i.e. some kind of attack on the White House.
Well, I mean, on that note, it is especially jarring considering, as you just pointed out, the reason why MAGA and Trump received such popularity, it was a breath of fresh air originally, was because of the anti-war message and the idea of focusing on rebuilding industry at home and focusing on a peace message. That was, again, something that was a deep spiritual need for Americans and people all around the world to hear something different, even though it was full of corruption and everything else. There was that. And now we're seeing the most popular, the man who sold himself as the most populist leader of America and the world, he says, do the most unpopular thing. The support popularly in the American population for this war is abysmally low, within the 20 percentile. It seems like almost sabotage of his own political movement, but also a sabotage of the economies of both America and the world, like the breakdown of energy systems, vital energy platforms that are vital to keep 8 billion people alive are being disrupted in a vital way. And I'm going to ask you, Robbie, soon about how that's impacting also Australia, which I know there's vast gas shortages. But comme qu'a partie, thank you for joining us. I know there was a bit of confusion in the links, but I'm always curious to get your take on the world situation. Robbie was just going through his assessment of where we're at right now a little bit. Where do you see right now the possibility of some form of resolution to this, or do you see the Iran war only escalating with the current thinking prevalent amongst those who are dropping the bombs from Israel and the American side? What's your take?
Greetings, thank you, Matt, and my best regards to your guest, Mr. Barwick. Let me first say that with a little bit of historical insight, we know that this whole conundrum began in 2002-2003 in the wake of the Second Iraq War, when General Wesley Clark explained that he had been told by some of his higher-ups at the Pentagon that there were 7 countries that had to be taken over, like Iraq, in the region in order to create a peaceful environment for Israel and for the United States. Now, if you connect that to Netanyahu's recent boast that he will fight a 7-front war, you can understand why this has been in preparation for a very long time. And Netanyahu himself said that he has wanted to basically destroy Iran, at least the Islamic Republic, for the last 40 years. So it has been practically an obsession with him. And what is very clear is that Trump, who was originally not at all interested as such in a war with Iran, as Mr. Barwick has pointed out, he was gradually programmed and convinced by handlers who actually enabled him, or at least helped him to take the presidency the first time, and then to come back with a very vengeful state of mind 2 years ago. And among them, of course, one of the principal actors was Sheldon Adelson, the owner of casinos, and it's in one of his casinos, in the one in Las Vegas, that Trump gave a speech in 2015 where he practically made his first bid for a presidential campaign. And at that time, he was telling the Jewish billionaires who were surrounding Adelson that it would be a good idea to make some sort of a commercial deal with the Palestinians. In other words, do business with them, because he said, you are all in real estate, I'm in real estate, why don't we handle it like a real estate transaction? And that was very poorly received. He was told that this message was completely unacceptable. And that's when he decided that he would take a very strong stand against the deal that had been the JCPOA, which had been negotiated by the Obama administration. And clearly, by rejecting it and by getting out of JCPOA, he won a lot of Zionist billionaire support in Israel and in the United States. Now, we have come to this point where clearly, for all sorts of reasons, including, as many have said, because of the pressure exerted on him from the Epstein files, he was given a sort of an offer he couldn't refuse, that either you go against Iran and take care of the Islamic Republic once and for all, or we will do it and we will further compromise you by exposing things that should not be exposed if you want to continue your political career, if you want to stay in the White House. Therefore, it is pretty clear, and this was not said by me or by some other conspiracy theorist, it was said by people like Blinken. It was said even by the former National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, who said that essentially the Israelis had got Trump in their snare and he couldn't say no to them. So he has reluctantly gone into it. And now, of course, his vanity and his narcissism has got the better of him. And he's desperately trying to claim an absolute victory, even if it implies destroying the whole of Iran, which is clearly what Netanyahu and some of the extremist Zionists want. What is very ominous is that now at least two Arab heads of state, namely Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia and Mohammed bin Zayed of the Emirates, have actually joined Netanyahu and perhaps Trump by saying that now there is no other solution than destroying the Islamic Republic, because if it is kept alive, if it survives, it will remain a constant threat to the security of the region and particularly of the Arab Sunni oil states. So I have a fear, a concern, that there will be an escalation which will lead to many more disasters before there is any possibility of a settlement. Because many people are hoping that Trump will just declare victory and walk away, but I don't think he can do that now. Because all the problems that he has, the legal problems, all the financial issues that have been raised against him, including suspicions that he has used the war to essentially conduct insider trading with his family, all that will hound him, so much so that for him and for Netanyahu, it's probably better to keep the war going as long as possible with the hope that Iran will collapse. But we all know that Iran may not collapse. And from what we are seeing, if any country is at risk of collapsing, it is Israel right now. And if you look at the size of the protests, the No Kings protests in the United States, you realize that Trump's regime itself is in a very fragile situation. So
that's oh yes, sorry, finish your thought.
Yes, please.
Yeah. It is a very sobering assessment, a startling one, and certainly the dangers of the illegality. I mean, the bombing did begin in the midst of a peace process, which was going quite well, according to the Omanian foreign minister, who was there brokering the deal between Witkoff and the Iranians, who were agreeing. Larijani's team was agreeing to every single condition being requested of them. And in the middle of those kinds of discussions, we launched the bombs unilaterally with Israel, targeting girls' schools, killing many of the young daughters of the IRGC leaders. First, in a very it's a reprehensible war crime that took place, after which we're seeing now an expansion of civilian deaths across the board. But again, vital energy infrastructure is being taken off. Refineries, natural gas sites are being blown up. I'm not even talking about the stuff as a side note, for the conspiracy-minded people out there, seeing also refineries go up in flames in Texas, of which there's been 2 during this period, also a little concerning. That I don't know. I'll just throw it out there as something for the audience to chew on. But then I hear also people like Mark Levin, and I'm going to play a little 1-minute clip of Mark Levin, a spokesman for the boots on the ground accelerationists who want to really, really take down or carry out or fulfill this regime change. And I'm just going to play this 1-minute clip and get your thoughts, Robbie. So here's Mark Levin.
Troops on the ground. He said no troops on the ground. I don't remember that in any campaign speech either. But why would we need troops on the ground? Well, there's a lot of reasons, and we wouldn't need 300,000 of them. It's this uranium, too. We've got to get the uranium. If it cannot be destroyed, if it cannot be altered, we got to get it. For the reason I just said, you can make dirty bombs, and over time you can still make sophisticated missiles. So you need to get to the uranium. That's why I'm reading in the paper, we're talking about the 82nd Airborne, we're talking about these various special forces and the various military services and so forth. He's not talking about sending regular army and infantry in by the hundreds of thousands. The men he's talking about, the units he's talking about, they are specialized. And you know what else? I remember from my days in the Reagan administration, many of them are trained for a moment like this.
I had to cut him off, but we're talking about boots on the ground. A lot of talking heads. Benny Gantz has been saying we've been waiting 47 years for this moment of getting boots on the ground. And what do you think is behind this? Do you think that they're actually going to do something so stupid that would result in what appears to me the mass death of a lot of American soldiers if they do that? I don't see how that could come out with a victory. Or like, what do you think the strategy is there? Do you think they're going to do that?
I truly think that probably the greatest danger in the world is the American mindset that they are militarily invincible, combined with the idea that God is on their side, and that keeps them divorced from reality at all times and capable of doing anything militarily, including eventually launching a nuclear bomb if it suits them. And they will talk themselves into boots on the ground. It's always, I use this term, my whole political adulthood, I've seen America talk itself into wars, and it talks itself into these things, right? I've never seen it talk itself out of a war. It always talks itself into it. And you're seeing that process happen now. I have to confess, Matt, I was a bit distracted by the Abraham Lincoln book over Levin's shoulder, right? Because I think there's you look at Abraham Lincoln, you wonder what modern Americans think. Do they even read these books? What made Lincoln famous, first of all, as a politician, long before he became president, was when he gave a speech in the U.S. Congress called the Spot Speech. Show me the spot, because he denounced his own country for starting a war based on a lie,
With Mexico.
right? And that was back in 1847 or something, right? The war with Mexico, and he denounced in the Congress his own country and called it a lie, and that man became a great president. These people are just repeating that pattern today. I have a particular insight because my best friend, who I work with in our office, was an Iraqi refugee who's fled with his family from the first Gulf War in 1990, came to Australia. He fought in the Iran-Iraq war. And if you talk to him, he will warn anybody, the last country you want to go to war with on the ground is Iran. He compares and he's not doing it by way of denigrating it, but he compares the mindset of the Iranian soldier, especially the volunteer who enlists, because they have their own sense of purpose, led by their dedication to their God, right? He compares them to. He said they're the closest things to the Japanese in World War II, right? Which made the fighting in Okinawa so deadly and bloody, right? Because these people would not stop. And he was an Iraqi on the other side of the border, lobbing bombs on them and watching how they fought. And combine that with the fact that I think one real problem is the way Americans can be so prejudiced. All Westerners, but they're the ones leading this, but especially Americans, because it's like they're deliberately kept insular and ignorant of the world around them, the true world around them. Someone made a joke. The reason Americans go to war is so they can learn geography or something. Anyway, these people sort of assume Iran, because it's in the Middle East, is it's like fighting the Bedouins in the Arabian desert, right? And it is so far from that. You've got a very, very sophisticated, ancient civilization of extremely smart people, and they have been preparing for this for the whole life of the Islamic Republic, right? And so whatever is in Mark Levin's head, we can send in the Navy SEALs, we can send in the 82nd Airborne, we can send in the Texas Rangers. These are the elite of the elite. They never lose. Well, that is a recipe for disaster. That is the definition of what could end up being famous last words. And then, of course, it demands an escalation, because America will not take such a result, especially someone like Trump. And what will the limit be? This is a war where people have already seriously talking about nuclear weapons. Cole mentioned Sheldon Adelson, the man whose money clearly played a big role in turning Trump at whatever stage. I've seen a clip of Sheldon Adelson before he died, obviously, saying we have to use nuclear weapons on Iran. That's the only way they'll get the message, right? This is already on the table, and the failure of something like an incisive attack, if that's what Levin thinks it would be, is exactly what would set up that scenario.
Yeah, that is the concern, and the fact that you have a nation like Israel that seems to actually have such a doctrine as the Samson doctrine doesn't settle the mind at all. That's for sure. Currently speaking, if that were to happen, do you think, Combe, that the issue currently animating the thinking of the Zionists who are threatening this nuclear orientation, is it purely geopolitical to sort of get control over a strategic? Because I've heard different theories, right? And it doesn't mean one is wrong. The other, various theories could be true at the same time as far as motive. Some are more practical, utilitarian, geopolitical motives, answering the question, why is this war happening? And some would say, oh, it's to disrupt the energy systems of Eurasia, break up the security of China, India, Russia, and other Eurasian powers that need Iran to be stable. Other people say, no, that's not it. It's actually that there's an end times eschatology of fanatics who want to invoke the book of Revelation in the end times to build Solomon's temple or something. And I'm just wondering, from your standpoint, what do you see as the emphasis? Do you think that it's either one of those two things? Are they equally as important, or is it another thing that I'm not even thinking about, Com?
It's a combination of both the factors you mentioned, because Netanyahu is by definition somebody who plays between very pragmatic politics, self-interest politics, which essentially require him to stay in power as long as he possibly can. And on the other hand, he also panders to the apocalyptic Zionists who wait for the Messiah and who feel that the Messiah will only come if a sort of a global war or an Armageddon takes place. And we know that the late leader of the sect of Chabad was telling Netanyahu, you have to accelerate the coming of the Messiah. And to do that, you must start a war, not only eradicate the Palestinians from the Holy Land, but also strike at your chief enemy, which is Iran. And I will cite two direct testimonies, in the sense people that I have actually talked to. One is an Indian journalist who just came back from Israel, where he was when the bombing began, and it took him a few days to be extracted from there. And he said that what he was impressed with, or rather shocked by, was the enormous brainwashing among most Israelis who were convinced that there was no other option than cutting off the head of the snake, because Iran is Amalek in their vocabulary, and so the Jewish religion, or even for those who are not religious, very urgent strategic priorities require that Iran be eliminated as a state. In other words, it should be like Syria, without an army, without a navy, without an air force, and therefore it should basically surrender. And that is and that's why they are desperately trying to assassinate every person who is either in power or next to power, hoping that there will be a complete vacuum of civilian and military leadership. And they are particularly targeting the religious leadership because they feel that the Shia Islam is the ultimate apocalyptic enemy of the Messiah. It's Antichrist. And on the other hand, they are quite comfortable with Sunni Islam, even when it manifests in Al-Qaeda or in Daesh. And they say so quite openly. And we know that in the last several years, they have often cooperated in various more or less occult ways with both organizations. And the one who said so recently is no other than Joe Kent, the national security official who resigned and accused Israel of pushing Iran and pushing the United States into a war which was unnecessary and which would end in a disaster. So you can see the multiplicity of agendas, because aside with that, you also have America's preoccupation with BRICS and its desire to break up at its inception before it can go any further or grow any further. They definitely want to stop BRICS in its tracks. And they see Iran as the critical link in the chain between the Near East, the Gulf, Russia, and China. And they feel that if they definitively crush Iran, then China loses a lot, Russia loses a lot, and other countries such as India become much more vulnerable. So you can see the convergence of strategic and religious convictions. So there is an agenda for Israel. And by the way, I can remind you of the Abraham Accords, which were essentially meant to put the entire Near East and Middle East under some sort of hegemonic Israeli guidance. Mm-hmm. And that was very clear. In fact, I had this comment from a former head of national security in Israel, face to face. He said, you know, we want to be the leaders of the Middle East because they have the money, we have the brains, we have the access to the technologies, and therefore we can make the Middle East very wealthy, provided we are basically number one there. You see, so there is no great mystery. It's very clear, and this is why Jared Kushner and Witkoff have been so committed, on the one hand, to trying to revive and preserve the Abraham Accords, and on the other hand, in some way, finding a way of eliminating Iran, even when they were claiming to negotiate with Iran, which they never did sincerely.
And can I, Matt, can I add?
Yeah, Matt, absolutely. Toss in and go for it.
One agenda serves the other, right? So this eschatological, religious, messianic view serves the imperial agenda, and it always has. You go back to 1840 when Palmerston, then the foreign minister of the United Kingdom, then 1840 called for a program to encourage Jewish settlement in Palestine as a way to build up British influence and power against the French. Way back then, it was an imperial play, and almost the same year, John Nelson Darby in England started the Plymouth Brethren, a church that I was actually raised in, and essentially invented Christian Zionism, so that this agenda was cheered on by religious fanatics in England who are now, and of course you got that element in American politics, there's probably 100 million of them, right, who are the real, they're far more of a guarantee of American support for Israel than Jewish billionaires' money, right? This entity that's been created around Christian Zionism, and it is this imperial thing that is primary. Brian Beletic, from Near Eastern Outlook has a very consistent theme there, where he points out that despite everything we've talked about now, there is a long-standing American agenda, bigger than an Israeli agenda. Israel serves at an imperial purpose for these guys, a long-standing agenda to get Iran. And I even printed it. It was a big job for my printer the other day when I printed it out. But the Brookings Institute paper, Which Path to Persia, from 2009, Brian points out, you read that paper and it is play by play what has happened since and what is happening right now as we speak against Iran. And of course, it is all directed at making sure they can take away this potential of the BRICS to completely introduce a new international economic order that undoes the power of the City of London and Wall Street, which is what this imperial agenda serves.
Well said. Now it's I do like the fact that both of you gentlemen are looking at both of those motives at the same time, and I think you have a very good synergy, and I think you're over the target in a very clear way. But now the question is, if they want to destabilize the BRICS, well, they're certainly doing a good job of it in that sense. But is it? I know that the idealized abstract planning and reality are often two very different things. When I look at China, which definitely relies on inputs of energy from abroad to maintain their growth model, which is, I agree, the sort of foundation upon which so much of our future depends upon the success of China and their relationship with their other Asian and Eurasian powers, civilizational neighbors, in collaborating together, coordinating together. This is certainly not a welcome thing. Do you think that China has diversified their, I think they have diversified quite a bit. They don't receive that much oil and natural gas from the Gulf states, they do get a lot from Iran, but not that much. They've spread themselves out. Do you think that they could weather this storm? Do you think India and Russia together are able to coordinate with China as one, or do you see a danger of the BRICS nations doing their own thing out of fear or whatever else and loosening the bonds of survival? Colm, do you see a danger in that loosening up of the BRICS right now, or do you see greater coherence and partnership that's standing firm?
In the short term, there is definitely a risk. And in fact, it's more than a risk, because there is enormous pressure being applied on all three countries. And basically what the US would like is to, on the one hand, make a deal with Russia, which would promise Russia a sort of a junior hegemon partnership. On the other hand, they would like to have a sort of a G2 with China, but they at the same time are trying to undermine China so that China has to reduce its economic growth and its military buildup. And they consider India to be a soft target, because they think that with the Anglo-Saxon culture, the legacy of colonialism from the British Empire, India would easily fall into I would say, a relationship of subordination to the United States and to its other allies. Now, this is easier said than done, because even though they have been trying to talk three different languages to the three major powers in BRICS, it hasn't really worked. As we know, Russia is having some relatively cordial discussions through Dmitriev with some members of the Trump administration, or at least some close associates of Trump, because we know that Trump bypasses the administration. He deals with everything as a businessman through his private, through his partners and through his family. Be that as it may, Russia at the same time reinforces the relationship with Iran by providing Iran with a lot of support militarily and economically, as does China. India, of course, has taken a different position, one, because it's more fragile. You were referring to the possibility that China would be seriously compromised in its development strategy by US actions, which is possible, but I think China has taken a lot of precautions to make sure that it would, even if it suffers, even if it has to scale back its plans, it will still remain relatively not untouched, but resilient. It has enough internal resources. It has a lot of energy coming from Russia. And I would like to say that India has now concluded some major agreements to increase its purchase of energy, both oil and gas, from Russia. Then, of course, there is a matter of renewables, which have made China 30% independent of fossil fuels. India is moving very fast on renewables as well, particularly solar. So there is a growing, on the part of China and Russia, there is a lot of autonomy, and on the part of India, there is a desire for autonomy. Because of its vulnerability, India has chosen to be relatively conciliatory to the US and try not to confront Trump frontally, because they know that can lead to a lot of problems. But very clearly, they realize that long term, the real interest lies with the strong partnership with Russia. And additionally, there is a real attempt, but also a very discreet one, to improve relations with China and restore cooperation. There is a lot of trade between India and China. It is unbalanced trade because China sells a lot more than it buys from India. However, there is a real attempt to move towards economic agreements, which would also be underpinned by currency agreements. And that's very important. India doesn't like the idea of the yuan becoming the successor to the dollar in the global economy, but it is working towards trading in national currencies. And that's something which they want to implement. In fact, India has the chair of BRICS this year. It's for the fourth time since the beginning of the BRICS. And it wants to use, this is official, it wants to use this year of chairmanship to make much of the trade between the BRICS members in national currencies. Now, we have to realize that India is not alone in being a, I would say, neutral country or even a pro-Western country, because if you look at Egypt, if you look at the Emirates, if you look at Indonesia, if you look at Ethiopia, Egypt, they are all very much closer to the West than to, let's say, the East, although that is gradually changing. So it's a matter of accommodation, because BRICS, if it were Russia and China, would definitely be a very, I would say, revisionist organization. But India and Brazil and others are saying, wait, we don't want to become a new sort of enemy of the West. We are trying to create an alternative. We are not trying to directly challenge and attack American economic and military hegemony, because we don't think we are ready to do that. We don't think we can feasibly do that. This may change, because if America undergoes a major defeat in Iran and in the region, I think this will give a lot of clout and a lot of new resolve to BRICS countries. And I think in that sense, India has preserved the future, because even when it appears not to be fully with the BRICS agenda and say, we have very strong relations with America, we want to be working with them, we need strategic partnership with them in case China becomes overbearing. But at the same time, for the longer term future, there is no doubt that the BRICS and the Eurasian and the Asian, African, South American partnership, the global South, is where India sees its future.
Robbie, I'd like to get your thoughts as well. I mean, you're a Pacific country down there in Australia. There's a lot of courting. I mean, the NATO of the Pacific is an idea, which is a terrible idea, which has been moving forward. India and Australia together are supposed to be on that list of an eventual new military alliance that would be more NATO-y. But at the same time, as that's a strategic threat to China, clearly, as far as the full spectrum dominance and encirclement policy of China in preparation for what many military leaders of the United States, as well as in NATO itself, are saying is an inevitable war with China that must happen within, they say 5 years of the consensus. I don't know. But obviously, the economic gravity that Australia has with China, just like India has a huge economic gravitational force with China, it's so unimaginably important. And we're seeing just the fragility of the Australian economy, especially now. I've been looking at headlines of I don't know how many gas stations have just announced they don't have gas, and this is just echoes of a potential crisis, which could be resolved if there were better, more robust friendship and cooperation with China on the Belt and Road and other things. So, what's your take both on the precariousness of the BRICS? You know, Iran is a BRICS member, UAE is a BRICS member. There's rifts potentially. India is playing some. You know, Combs' assessment I think was quite good, but what's your take both on that and also the Australian relationship with China being pulled from two different directions?
Well, first, I just want to observe, following what Com said. To me, I think it is significant that Putin has been president since 2000, except for 4 years when he was prime minister. Xi's been president since 2013, and before that, he was vice president. There's the continuity of their administrations means that they have watched this whole thing unfold in front of their eyes. They're not newcomers that have come in to deal with something that they weren't aware of, right? They've seen this a long way off, and I think it's forced them to be very well prepared. Nobody, I think most people, including Russia's best friends, were very pleasantly surprised at how well the Russian economy weathered the sanctions after 2022, right? And that was not by accident. It's not because some supernatural power came down and blessed them. They were prepared. China, of course, is a country that puts its very survival first and foremost, and is incredibly well prepared for these things. Doesn't mean they're not disruptive, but it has got lots and lots of contingencies, and we're seeing that now in the energy crisis. And now to Australia, that does blow back on us, because one of the things China has had to do is stop exports of the refined products like aviation gas. That Australia, Australia has only 2 refineries left. We had 8 at the turn of the century. We've only got 2 left. A lot of the problems you're seeing in those headlines are entirely self-inflicted through the neoliberal insanity that took over this country. We are the highest per capita consumers of diesel in the world by far, yet we are an outlier among the world's nations as having the lowest fuel reserve of any country in the world. The minimum International Energy Agency requirement is 90 days. We had 30 days. And frankly, that was an improvement from something like 14 days at one stage, because our governments for decades have had this idea of the market will always deliver this stuff just in time. And so the consequences of that are really hitting us hard, because countries that we've relied upon to refine our diesel and petroleum and aviation gas, in the case of countries like China, South Korea, Malaysia. Well, China's a big one, and it's had to say, no, we're not going to export that anymore. And of course, there's a little bit of commentary in Australia about, this is, how dare China do that? But of course, there are Americans who have said, well, the silver lining of this war is the impact it's having on China. China's the real target. We're weakening China by doing this. Our government cheered those people on in supporting this war, right? China didn't support this war. Our government supported this war. So China's had to take steps to preserve its fuel supplies naturally. And we, the country that decided not to be prepared for such a contingency, right, it's well and truly blown back on us. But it also, for Australia, it's a fascinating time. I don't think the government of Australia is any less subservient to the United States now than it was in 2022 under the previous government, Scott Morrison and the Conservative government. The only difference is the new government of Anthony Albanese. They said, we do want to stabilize the relationship with China because of that gravitational pull of the economy, right? We are so dependent on China buying our products that if they decided not to, and the big one is iron ore. We make enormous amounts of money selling iron ore to China. I recently traveled to China, Matt, and in October, we went on a 20-day China study and goodwill tour, and I got to ride on the high-speed rail there, and I saw where Australia's iron ore has gone, and Australia has not built 1 millimeter of a high-speed rail. It's all in China, right? So we've made an enormous amount of money out of that. And if the Chinese decide, well, no, we're not going to keep that relationship. They've brought alternatives online like Simandou in Africa, which is a higher grade iron ore anyway. Now it's not ultimately going to replace it, but they could even temporarily put us on ice, and that would be enormously damaging to our economy. So there are people in Australia that are very, very aware of that, and so they try and put stability first in the relationship. And I think the reason it's succeeded is because there's actually a lot of goodwill on the China side. Once we had a change of government in 2022, the Chinese said, "Okay, we'll draw a line under that." The old government was rather obnoxious. We'll treat this as a fresh slate. But despite that, our government is allowing the biggest US military buildup in peacetime ever on our soil. From World War II, now the Americans used Australia as a base in World War II, and that was perfectly legitimate. We needed that as well. It helped to save us from the Japanese. Though only in recent years have I came to appreciate how one of the factors that also helped to save us was the enormous sacrifice the Chinese made fighting the Japanese and keeping them bogged down, so that it was much harder for them to just invade and rampage across Australia. But from World War II until 2011, no Australian government allowed a permanent US military presence on Australian soil. And we were always America's friends. And in fact, we were always their sycophantic sidekicks. But our governments from all those decades at least had a sense of independence enough to say, no, that's not appropriate, right? Because if you have military bases, you're giving away a certain amount of control. But from 2011 onwards, we have had an enormous buildup. In 2014, we signed this thing called the Force Posture Agreement that I got to talk to Chaz Freeman, the US diplomat who was the ambassador to Saudi Arabia. And he was familiar with the Force Posture Agreement. He likened it to the American occupations of Japan and Germany after World War II. What are the terms of our Force Posture Agreement with the United States? We've given them carte blanche access to and control of all these military bases in Australia, and it is enormous. And they are doing it because they are preparing for a war with China, and we won't have a say in it. We will be involved in it. John Lander, the diplomat who's a member of our organization, I interview him on our show, he points out that we are turning ourselves into Ukraine, which is America's proxy against Russia. We will be that against China. And just like Ukraine, China won't send missiles over to the United States. China will smash Australia, and it will all be self-inflicted.
Sorry, I had my mute on. Sorry. That brings up a bit of a paradox, which I'm going to throw at you, Com, which is that in the U.S. security doctrine announced in, I think it was December 2025, maybe it was November, it called for an acceptance, at least in language, of a multipolar sort of reality, an idea of focusing on consolidating control over the Americas and kind of extracting U.S. enmeshment in a lot of these. The U.S. has something like 800 plus military bases spread out all over the world. And while there was a disturbing imperial language, reminiscent of Teddy Roosevelt's corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, which did so much damage a century ago to the lives and the peoples of Latin America. There was a revival of that, which is extremely disturbing. Many people were still hopeful that the focus of extracting, again, U.S. Commitments in the Middle East and other places, and really just focusing on the Americas might might create a space for the Eurasian powers, for the global South to breathe a little bit, to maybe regroup, cooperate, accelerate their development. And at the same time, as there does seem to be an element of, we're seeing the Shield of the Americas operation, there does seem to be a truth to that agenda to take Greenland, Venezuelan oil, other things. Cuba seems to be on the chopping block. Panama, Panama's been pressured to kick out the Chinese Cristobal and Balboa ports on the Panama. So you've got evidence of that, but at the same time, you do seem to also have, like Robbie was just saying, an accelerated military posture that does seem to also be preparing to do something drastically destructive to Asia and specifically to China. And I'm wondering, in your mind, how these things fit. Do you think that it's true what some say, that the U.S. is perhaps planning on just doing this? Like, one thing I've heard is that Trump is accelerating this policy in Iran in order simply to burn off the excess fat in the U.S. military, have an excuse, by accelerating the crisis, and have an excuse then to finally say, okay, well, the show is up, we've won, we're going to leave now, and we'll let Israel just deal with it themselves, and we're going to just leave and go home and focus on the American technocracy. Or do you think that this is all about really destroying? Do you think that the war policy is as dangerous as Robbie is saying? Or do you think that the focus is more to destabilize these regions by economic destabilization and not really go for kinetic war?
You see, I think that Trump is a prisoner of his own contradictions, or rather of the contradictions within the movement that he has taken over. On the one hand, you have the MAGA, who were sincerely, for the most part, hoping that America would concentrate on its home soil, on restoring its economy, on reducing the debt burden, on eliminating unneeded military expenses abroad, and on reducing the military budget to put some sort of a rein in the disastrous American budget deficit, which has now grown to 38 trillion, and which gives no sign of being reduced. They are adding 1.5 to 2 trillion a year. And on top of that, they are reducing their real earnings and income because of the collapse of the industrial structure and the return of America to the status of a comprador economy, which essentially trades in notional units like the dollar. Now, as a result, Trump, who has no particular set ideas of his own, he bought into several different agendas and tried to reconcile them to secure a majority. I think there is also to be one thing that needs to be taken into account is Trump's own personality, which is, as I said before, it's basically typical of a malignant narcissist, and he is very vengeful towards the very country which he rules. He is actually very angry with the bureaucracy and the political establishment because he knows how many of them were against him and tried to undermine him by claiming he was a Russian agent and all sorts of things. So he's basically happy to humiliate. It's his nature. He likes to humiliate almost everybody he's in contact with to show his superiority. So he wouldn't be necessarily all unhappy if America went into a real bad situation. The only thing that worries him about it is that himself would be affected. So he will try to say, which he's already doing, it's not my fault, I did everything. With me, you would have had the best country, the best budget, the best economy, but because of all those idiots who surround me, look at where we are. Now he's clearly saying that the war with Iran was started by people like Kushner and Witkoff and others, and he's in a way right, but of course the buck stops with him. So to answer your question, I would say that there is, on the one hand, a MAGA constituency which is very angry with Trump. The sincere MAGA has become essentially not only inimical, hostile, but even derogatory about Trump. You just have to hear Tucker Carlson, and I can mention several others, Megyn Kelly, etc. They say he's a traitor, he's a sellout, etc. And they are accusing Kushner of treason for essentially serving the interest of Israel while negotiating with Iran. You know, this has been said by Jonathan Powell, who was a British observer at the talks that were held in Oman. He said Witkoff and Kushner were undeniably Israeli assets. They were not working for the US, they were working for Israel. So that in itself is very disturbing, considering that they were private citizens. They are private citizens and had no official legal position. This being said, I think that there is also the neoconservative wing, which has very much penetrated the Trumpian movement, and which is always claiming, and in fact, I would say baying for blood. They want the global hegemony. They want to retain more than anything the dollar as a pillar of American power. And therefore, they will go against any force which could potentially provide an alternative to the dollar and to the dollar dominance, which is something that Trump has repeated. I will not allow anybody to step out of the dollar zone, in the sense that everybody will have to go through the dollar to international transactions. So as a result, trying to reconcile these different positions is not easy, and Trump probably has no clear idea how to do it. I think he's trying to play with the people that surround him and give them what they want. On the one hand, he's supporting Israel to the hilt. On the other hand, he's saying maybe we should just pull out. But then he says we can't do that because, you know, we have to remain dominant, otherwise the dollar will collapse. And so he doesn't have much room to maneuver at this point. You see, look at what his alternatives are. And this was said by no other than some of the British generals and sheriff. They said, you know, this war is a disaster because it was totally unprepared. The Americans were not given any serious planning options. And the generals advised Trump not to do it. But then Israel said, now you have an option. If you go in now, you can kill all the leadership, and then Iran will turn into a pro-American state. Of course, that didn't happen, but it was too late because they had carried out mass assassination true to the Israeli methodology, you know, blackmail and then assassinate. So as a result, Trump now, if he steps back, he looks like he has lost, no matter how many times he can claim that he's winning or that he has won. If he goes on and escalates, then he's driving the country into an unforeseeable future, which is certainly not going to be pleasant for the people who live either in the US or outside of it. At this point, what Trump is trying to sell is that the US is still the strongest country because it's autonomous in energy. Therefore, if other countries collapse because of lack of energy, the US will retain some sort of supremacy there. But I frankly do not think Trump would be able to give an answer. And from the attitude of people closest to him, I think they are driven either by a sycophantic agenda. They just want to stay close to Trump because that's where the power comes from, or they are just fanatics like Ehret, who is praying Christ to enable the Americans to kill all the bad people, which means carry out extermination. It's sort of biblical Old Testament agenda. So it's a very dire scenario because who is going to instill some sense and be listened to?
Well, and that's the really startling thing when the mind, which is naturally problem solving in its nature, the mind is a beautiful thing, and we're always looking for, okay, there's a crisis, there's a mess. How do we solve the crisis? And you're looking for the adults in the room, like where are the potential minds out there with some influence that can actually be morally and intellectually qualified to do something useful to put out the fires that we've permitted to spread so far and so wide. And as you pointed out, the neocon agenda has really found a new MAGA garb, it seems. And even Palantir, right? Peter Thiel, who also spawned Anduril, are being integrated with the U.S. military to manage AI systems. Moral railguards are being taken down from AI when it deals with military decision-making. The Iron Dome or Golden Dome is something which Palantir is also responsible for managing, as one of our watchers has pointed out. And Peter Thiel has written his manifesto over 15 years ago called The Straussian Moment, where he self-identifies his role intellectually as a Straussian, having been groomed by Richard Pearl and a number of weird figures around. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. So you definitely have this weird new Straussianism, but also manifested with this apocalyptic veneer. He's also obsessed with the Armageddon and the idea of reframing the idea of AI and what have you as the manifestation of Lucifer and a culmination of Book of Revelations from this weird atheistic, technocratic Silicon Valley mindset. And at the same time, you have the Hegsets, who are more the conventional, old school Darbyite, evangelical, fanatics in their own way. But they're both kind of converging with the same effects in the material world, which is scary. Now, I'm going to end this with you because I just realized we've hit the top of the hour. Robbie, you are a solution-oriented person. That's why I enjoy listening to you so much. And if there were, I'm going to throw, maybe it's a bit of a challenging one, but if there were sane people in positions of some authority to make decisions based on the fact that we know that the current system that has been shaping the world or misshaping the world over the past decades, based on the US dollar as the foundation of everything and pure speculation, that's coming to an end. We are going to get a new system. It seems inevitable that a new system will emerge. What that's going to look like remains to be seen. What do you think sane representatives of the better part of Western civilization should be doing in this crisis if they were fit to survive, to both deal with the messes we made in the Middle East, but also what the messes we will be making soon with Eurasia more broadly? What would you say would be the thing to do as a way of thinking or a way of action policy-wise that would be sane? And I'm not saying it's possible, but what would be, or not, I'm not saying it is possible, but I'm not saying that it has to be practical, but what do you think should be done?
Well, when I think of such things, I have to think of it as an Australian, and Australia likes to call itself a middle power, but we're a large landmass with a very small population, and I think we exaggerate our status as a middle power. I tend to think of us as Scrappy Doo from the cartoons next to Scooby Doo, and the Mystery Machine crew. So we're a bit full of ourselves, but we do play a certain role. And I mean, obviously, in our view, everyone wants to survive, right? And everyone wants to prosper. That's a given. But we have decided for a long time that our pathway to doing that is getting America to guarantee our security by maintaining itself as a presence in the Asia Pacific, though we've now bought into this propaganda term Indo-Pacific, which is 2/3 of the world, by the way, which is why it's a propaganda term. There's no such thing as the Indo-Pacific, and that's been our view so far. So what I think it's incumbent upon me as a political activist in this country to try and change that outlook, because if we could change that outlook and identify a better path, then we could actually play somewhat of a role. I don't want to exaggerate that, but we've been so loyal to the United States for so long. We'd like to brag we're the only country that's fought alongside them in every war in from the 20th century onwards. That it would be quite, if our current Prime Minister, for example, who grew up with a reputation as being a left-winger who was anti-US imperialism and pro-Palestine and all that, and since becoming Prime Minister, he's been a bitter disappointment. But if he had taken this opportunity of this war, which was a clear breach of international law, to lay down that, no, Australia does not support the United States on this is wrong, then the administration has to explain that back on the home front in America, why for the first time the Aussies, the good old Aussies who have always been with us, are not with us, right? And that's something that then strengthens the hand of the people in the United States who don't want this either, right? And who are very much pushing for an alternative to this. And then it leads to a discussion about, well, let's look at what our discussion tonight, right? What's it about? What's the future of BRICS? Well, what is BRICS? What is BRICS as an alternative? It's an alternative economic pathway. It doesn't really have a strategic agenda, though it represents a strategic difference just because of how fanatical the current system is. But a country like China, if we let the blinkers fall off our eyes, This is a country that's dedicated to peace and prosperity. And if you don't believe me, go and visit and see it, right? It obviously has the scariest, if America wants a war with China, they're going to get one, and they will not believe what they've brought themselves into, because it will be absolutely deadly what China could do. But I spent 20 days there, and I saw soldiers on the last day. It's got the biggest military in the world, but you don't see it. But I've been to America many, many times, and the militarism is ostentatious. It's everywhere. It's in your face, right? China, the one country that could take America toe to toe, is the opposite. They have that ability, but they are not militaristic. They emphasize peace and prosperity. And if people could just see that, isn't that what we want? Isn't that what the future of the world should look like, right? You go to Africa now, the progress in living standards in Africa has Chinese fingerprints all over it, right? They see that. America is trying to disrupt in South America the same progress that the Chinese have invested in. And you go around and look at what this Chinese influence is, it's all economic, right? It's all resulting in upgraded living standards. And so what I think is it's about letting the scales fall off people's eyes and actually see the world for what it is and realize, look, that is a much better path. Let us in the West shake off our militarism and go down that path. And I'm hoping to be an advocate for that argument and achieve that from our position here in Australia, because I do think it's not a difficult thing. It's just seeing the world differently and taking a different path.
Thank you, Robbie. Thank you, Com. Actually, let me throw it. I'll give you one last opportunity. Do you want to share some final closing remarks before we close out for today?
To complement what has just been said, I would like to say that, yes, there is a real hope in BRICS, because on the one hand, you have powerful countries of the global south, such as Brazil and India, which have in some way parallels in their economic development and in the state of their societies. And then you have, of course, very strong military and economic powers, such as China and Russia. And they are coming together and bring together many other countries from the global south and some from the north, even possibly from Europe, would be a major change in the global power structure, which would force the US to reconsider its own position. Right now, the US is still hell-bent on preserving hegemony at almost any cost. But if it cannot succeed, then it will have to look for a different path and for a different attitude to the world. And in my mind, one of the very critical things that's happening now is that there is a real break between American national interest ideology, or what you might call it nationalism, and the Zionist agenda, which was until now and still is at the core of America's global position and philosophy. The fact that there is now a real rejection of Zionism, partly because of what happened in Gaza, what is happening in Iran, the overall sense that among many Americans that they have been sort of taken over by an alien country, which shows its power in the way it manipulates its presidents and controls its foreign policy, that will have far-reaching impact, as people like Max Blumenthal and others have said, because it will essentially force America to take a different position and perhaps eventually let go of Israel to follow its own path without considering it as an obligatory controller of American foreign policies. And its close allies, such as Britain, have had until now. So I would say this is altogether the direction that is full of pitfalls and dangers, but that can lead to a much better global situation. And let us hope that this is what can emerge out of the current conflict.
You've both given me and the audience a lot to chew on, and I appreciate so much the deep historical appreciation for how we got here, what pathways exist for us to move through this very difficult challenge and test that humanity is currently facing in history. thank you both. I'm looking forward to future conversations and picking both of your brains in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you so much. And I'm going to include links very soon to both of your websites in the description box under this video. And please share, like, and subscribe to this channel. Get the word out there. And yeah, let's take reality very seriously going forward, everybody. And thank you so much. Take care.